Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kathy Ledesma. I'm the National Project Director for AdoptUSKids. I am so thrilled today to be welcoming you and doing the introduction for today's webinar, Support Matters, Strategies for Implementing Family Support Services. I want to tell you a little bit about the webinar. The occasion of scheduling this is the publication of a new guide by AdoptUSKids, Support Matters, Lessons from the Field on Services for Adoptive, Foster, and Kinship Care Families. This is a 300-page publication that has been in the works for almost 3 years. We are thrilled to roll this out to the field. It's available on the National Resource Center for Diligent Recruitment website and the AdoptUSKids website. You can access it either way. But this is really more than a guide. What we're hoping to do is energize the field, all about 250 of you who are out there listening in, to get you excited and on board about exploring the importance of support for foster, adoptive, and kinship care families from your very first contact all the way through placement and beyond. So today we'll be looking at how does your jurisdiction make family support really part of your diligent recruitment plan. How are you planning from the very beginning when you have contact with families and are searching for families? How do you begin to support them and continue that support through placement? We're also going to be talking about how to assess your system's needs. And you're going to hear how some states and tribes have created family support programs. That's an integral part of this new guide. There are several dozen examples. I know I always learn best from examples from how other jurisdictions have done things. And really to the point, we're going to be hearing from Alabama, the state of Alabama, about their program and their lessons learned. Our presenters today are Mary Boo, who is part of the family support team at AdoptUSKids. Mary is the principal author of this new guide and really our resident expert on this topic. Also presenting today is Becky Main, who is with the National Resource Center for Diligent Recruitment at AdoptUSKids as our Tribal Child Welfare Specialist. We are very excited today to be joined by two professionals, wonderful professionals from the state of Alabama. First, Connie Chance Rogers, who is a wonderful colleague and the program supervisor for the Office of Adoption in Alabama's Department of Human Resources Family Services Division. And last but certainly not least, a presenter today will be Deb Finley, who is the program director with the Children's Aid Society in Alabama. And I'm sorry I misspoke. She is the Alabama Pre- and Post-Adoption Connections Director at Children's Aid Society, and a wonderful example of a very strong public-private collaboration to provide services to families. I also want to welcome, because I heard you all in the background with a big shout out, about 25 to 30 staff from Children's Aid Society in Alabama have tuned in today. So welcome to everyone, and I would like to turn it over now to Jill May, who will do the housekeeping for us.
Thanks, Kathy. Hi, everybody. I'm Jill Marshall-May, Director of the National Resource Center for Diligent Recruitment at AdoptUSKids. And as Kathy said, we're super excited about this webinar, especially since we know that recruitment and support go hand in hand in order to achieve permanency and placement stability. So my role today on the call, as Kathy said, I'm going to take us through some housekeeping items and walk us through the agenda. And then I'll come back on at the end to talk about some resources that we have available through the National Resource Center and AdoptUSKids. And then I will facilitate the question and answer period at the end. So before we dive in, we want to go over a few housekeeping details. The webinar is an hour and a half hours long with time at the end to respond to your questions. This webinar is going to be recorded and archived, and the audio and PowerPoint presentation will be available on our website at thenrcdr.org. For this webinar, we've muted your lines, but we absolutely want to hear from you, and we hope that the webinar will be interactive and responsive to your questions. We'll ask several poll questions during the webinar, and we ask for you to respond to those poll questions. On the next slide, we'll show you how you can use the chat feature to ask us questions. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll have a brief evaluation for you to fill out. Please stay on to complete the evaluation so that we can use your feedback to inform future webinars. So although your lines are muted during the webinar, we do have ways for you to submit questions or let us know if you need help. As you can see in the screenshot here, you can use the raise your hand feature to let us know if you need any assistance. You can also use the chat feature to submit questions throughout the webinar. We'll collect all the questions you submit, and then we'll answer as many of them as possible at the end of the webinar. You can also use the chat feature to let us know if you're having any technical difficulties. We have a whole crew of people on the line here to support you, and we'll respond to you to help get any difficulties resolved. We will also be providing some troubleshooting tips in the chat window. All right, so to walk us through the agenda, Kathy talked a little bit that we're going to be walking through planning for family support, making the case for support services, assessing your community's needs, understanding the types of support services, and we'll be walking you through some selected examples of programs, and then we'll also hear about some tribal family support services. And then, as Kathy said, we're super excited to have Alabama on to talk about their lessons learned. We'll talk about implementing family support services, resources to strengthen family support, and then again at the end we'll have a question and answer period. So now I'm excited to get this started, and I'm going to turn it over to Mary Boo, who will kick us off. Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, Jill. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm Mary Boo, and as Kathy said, I'm a member of the AdoptUSKids Family Support Team. And as Kathy also said, the support team for AdoptUSKids published Support Matters, Lessons from the Field on Services for Adoptive, Foster, and Kinship Care Families this spring. And it's a guide to help state, tribal, and territorial leaders and others learn more about the support services for foster, adoptive, and kinship care families. And I want to mention that she said it's 300 pages, and I know that's incredibly daunting. You don't have to read the whole thing, although I would love it if you did. There are different pieces of it that can help people at different stages in the process, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So don't be put off by its size. We hope the guide will be a resource to you and to the field, but we also want to make sure you know that the National Resource Center for Diligent Recruitment at AdoptUSKids is available to provide state, tribal, and territorial leaders with technical assistance in this area. As Jill said, support and recruitment are so linked, and it's really important to talk about those two together when we can. On today's webinar, we're going to address several key aspects of planning for and implementing family support services, and the NRCDR can also support you through those areas, which include making the case for support services, assessing the needs of children, youth, and families, programs currently supporting families, issues related to partnerships, and implementation issues. And I'm going to start by talking about making the case for support services. Now, everyone here knows the value of support services, or you wouldn't be here today. So I want to start off, I want to talk about a few points that you can use with others who may not be as aware of why services help children, youth, and families. And these are points that the guide has and that the Resource Center can help you with. We know that research tells us how effective services can help families understand the needs of children and youth and how they can meet them. We know that support can prevent disruptions or moves. Some of the programs we looked at had incredibly good outcomes at keeping children in the same family over time. One research study showed that the amount of emotional or social support a parent received had a significant impact on increasing foster placement stability. And those are points that we can make when making the case for services. We know that services such as training and working with other experienced parents can help caregivers improve their parenting skills to respond to their kids' behaviors and needs. And we know that services can help children and youth heal and reduce problem behaviors, particularly some of the evidence-based therapeutic techniques that a number of programs are using. Unfortunately, though, sometimes children's behaviors or disabilities don't change very much. We know that can be the case. In these cases, services such as peer support can help parents hang in there during the tough times. Support groups, one-on-one peer liaisons can be particularly effective at this. And the other thing we know is that often it's hard to be a caregiver of a child or youth who's experienced trauma. And knowing you're alone is key, and services really help with this. And the same isolation can be true for children and youth. Sometimes we hear that children who've experienced trauma and had rough times early on don't have as many friends or have some trouble with relationships. And getting to know other adopted or foster children can be really life affirming. But we need to make the case about why services help children and families, but we also need to make the case about why services help administrators, help all of us do our work better. And first and foremost, they help administrators meet their ultimate goal, which is ensuring safety, permanency, and well-being for children. We know services also help with recruitment. One of the first easiest ways is through word-of-mouth recruiting. When a family is successful and thriving, they can encourage others and serve as an inspiration to others who will step forward to do foster care or adoption. We also know when families know support will be there, they're more likely to step forward during recruitment efforts and then to commit to or finalize a placement. Supporting families during recruitment, training, and licensing can help ensure you meet your recruitment goals. The families that you find actually become licensed families with a placement. This early support also reinforces that your agency will be there for families long after the placement. The other thing we know is that families who are doing well, which support services can make happen, will often adopt again or take another foster placement. For example, if agencies provide support when a child has to leave a foster family to return home or for more intensive treatment, the family may be more likely to foster another child or even adopt again after a disruption. We know that another place where support helps is if agencies provide support. I'm going to say the other thing that support services do is they can help retain families. Support can reduce moves, which prevents further trauma for children. The last thing I'll say about making the case for administrators is that we know that support services can help them be responsible stewards of government funds. Recent research by Mary Hansen showed public savings of more than $200,000 per child adopted from foster care. And we know, as I said earlier, supported foster care also reduces moves, which saves money and improves placement stability. Placement moves in foster care are expensive in addition to harming children. Each move is another family to be found and trained. Okay, so now we know support services can help children and family and are a good investment. What's next? What we think is next is assessing the community's needs. Before creating or changing services offered to families, it's a good idea to determine what really needs to be done. And the needs assessment process has a number of steps. First is figuring out what's out there already. You can look at the services your child welfare agency has provided. Then what other public entities, such as the Children's Mental Health Program or the Health Department, might offer. Then what are private agency support groups, foster adoptive parent associations, adoption exchanges? What are others offering for local families? A second step is to figure out what children, youth, and families need, what they say about their own needs. And you can do that through surveys of families, focus groups, or both. You can also survey other experts in the community to find out what's worked in other areas. And I want to make one note here about assessments in tribal communities. The Pascua Yaqui tribe recently did a major child welfare needs assessment, and when they reported on their findings, they noted the importance of involving elders in planning and implementation, but also found that it was incredibly important to have an outside person involved in some interviews. They found it was easier for parents to talk about their needs to an individual they didn't know rather than a neighbor or someone they would see on a regular basis. And I guess the tip there is really to know your own community and make the best decisions about assessments based on local customs and practices. So I'm going to get into a little bit more detail about assessing needs. The guide has some tools to help you assess needs, and the National Resource Center for Diligent Recruitment can also help you identify needs in your community and tailor some of those tools to your needs. On this slide are some of the questions you might want to include in a survey of parents. You can take the sample survey included in the guide and use it as it is, adapt it for your purposes, or just let it guide the creation of your own needs assessment. And one of the things to think about when doing a survey is to determine how you can reach a diverse pool of respondents. And diverse both in terms of race and ethnic background, age, geographic location, but also in terms of time since placement and connection to the community. And this connection to the community I want to highlight. One of the things that's tricky is that families who aren't connected closely to the agency may have very different needs than those who are already remaining engaged. They can be tougher to find, but it's an important group to get to. And here's just a quick look at a page of the survey we have in the guide. And you'll see that we want parents to look at each type of service, such as counseling for their child, and to say if they didn't need or use it, if they needed it but couldn't access it, or needed it but didn't use it. And then if they did use it, we wanted them to rate it. And so again, this is a great, really sort of compact way to get a lot of information about the necessary services. Another way to assess needs is a focus group. And you can use a focus group to either further tease out information suggested by a survey, or as your primary needs assessment if a survey is too difficult to do. Just like with the survey, of course, you want to ensure diverse representation to get the most accurate information. And I'm not going to read them, but we'll put it up here for a minute. These are some of the questions you might ask during a focus group. And I will note that if you're using the focus group to get more rich input on a survey you've conducted, the questions would flow from those key survey results rather than from these questions here. For example, if your survey showed a particular type of service you offer was not useful, a focus group might help you figure out if there are problems that can be resolved, or if the service itself is not what families need. And then on the next slide, I want to highlight a population we too often forget to ask for input. And again, in the guide, we included these focus group questions for youth. These young people have a lot to say, and we should definitely listen. Here are some questions you might ask. Excuse me. And one is a question about youth needs and challenges. And what we've seen is that asking young people to talk about what they've struggled with will often get quite different information than asking parents only. Another question I'd like to highlight here is the question about what youth wish their parents knew. This is a great way to surface any training needs or topics that you might address in support groups. And with youth in particular, it's really important with the focus group to have a facilitator the participants are very comfortable with, who can engage them and make them willing to share their insights. I suspect all of us are fairly well aware of how difficult it can sometimes be to get teams to participate and to give feedback. And having the right facilitator can make a huge difference in that. We're now going to move on to the first of our poll questions, and this is going to get you ready for the 2016 presidential election, ready for polls over and over again, but this is the first one. Can you tell us what types of needs assessment you've done for foster, adoptive, or kinship care families in the last 5 years? Okay, we'll give it just another couple of minutes and then we'll see the results. Another couple of seconds, excuse me. Okay, let's see what everyone's doing. All right, great. It looks like informal, sort of what we'd expect, that informal discussions are top of the list, but it's great to see that more than a third of people are also surveying parents and doing focus groups. It's really good to see that people are getting input from the people they serve. Next, I'm going to talk pretty briefly about the supportive services that might be offered to adoptive, foster, and kinship care parents. I'm going to focus here, as the guide does, on services after placement, but as both Kathy and Jill said, we know support matters from the first contact with prospective families. We found that support services fit into 15 broad categories that are outlined over the next few slides. I'm not going to talk about every one. I'm just going to highlight a few service areas. The first is the child or youth assessment, and I think we've seen a lot of growth here in recent years where people are now doing even more trauma-informed assessments that help identify children's strengths, needs, the services their families may need to help them heal and grow, and changes the family might need to make to support the child's ongoing development. In information there, we're talking about websites, fact sheets, newsletters, and lending libraries. And Alabama's later going to tell you about a great lending library. Third one, in navigation, advocacy, and referral. Many programs have a phone helpline through which caregivers, staff, or volunteers answer questions, provide support, and make referrals to community resources. They may also help parents advocate for benefits the family needs, such as special education services and mental health care. Training and other development can be in-person or web-based, most often for parents or caregivers. Some programs, like Alabama's, also offer training to child welfare professionals. On the next slide, we're going to talk about some of the services that we consider enhanced services that maybe not in as many programs. First is peer support, which includes parent liaisons or navigators, mentoring, buddy programs, support groups, or social activities. We know that many support programs offer other services for children and youth, such as cultural activities, recreational opportunities, job training, and employment support. And case management, and that's something we often think about for foster care, but in some support programs have targeted case management as well, in which a trained professional or team works with a family to identify strengths and protective factors as well as challenges. Then the case manager partners with the family to design and implement a family-specific plan to improve functioning and reduce problems. A number of support programs offer planned respite through weekend or evening events, vouchers to pay for services, or family matching programs. We know that camps or retreats are growing in popularity. You'll hear more later about Alabama's wonderful Camp APAC, and I can tell you that some of the retreats I learned about made me want to do some site visits, places doing massage and yoga and fun activities. We also know that some programs offer modest financial support, such as to cover child care, medical equipment, payments for youth activities. Others offer free school supplies, books, and clothing for children. And the final group of services are intensive. And therapeutic services can include in-home and community-based services and access to residential treatment. We featured a number of programs providing evidence-based or informed services, including parent-child interaction therapy or trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. And then crisis services is another option, and some of the programs offer 24-hour hotlines staffed by trained professionals who can make emergency referrals and provide advice. Other crisis services include emergency respite care and in-home crisis response teams. Now we're going to do another poll. Again, think about what you all are doing. Enough about me. Here's a list of some of the services I've just described, and can you check off those that your program provides? Okay, let's close this up in just another 10 seconds or so. All right, so again, case management is top here, and I'm wondering, I'd be interested to know how many of those are foster care specific versus adoption and kinship care. And then it's good to see that respite is such a high number, that we know that that's an incredibly needed service. And AdoptUSKids has a couple of great resources on creating and sustaining respite programs, so you can check those out as well. All right, looks like a lot is being offered there. Now I'm going to talk about a couple of specific programs. In the guide, we described 31 programs that support foster, adoptive, and kinship care families in a variety of ways. And to develop this list, we looked at program variety, outcomes, reputation in the field, and other factors. We talked with program staff about the work they did, their program evaluation, and developed fairly detailed program profiles. Our goal is to offer an array of support service options, and I want to emphasize that we know there are wonderful programs out there that we are not able to include. And I also want to say that we don't put these out there to make you jealous if your area doesn't have this type of program. We really are about this is possible. This is what's happening all over the country. So we hope that these are aspirational descriptions of programs. The first program I'm going to talk about is the Midwest Foster Care and Adoption Association, which serves about 850 foster, kinship care, and adoptive parents who live in or have children from the states of Missouri and Kansas. The services include individual family advocates who help families resolve problems and reduce barriers as they work through the system. These advocates also help families in crisis make a plan to resolve any problems they're having. Through this program, parents and youth can be matched with experienced mentors. The association also certifies, trains, and makes referrals to respite providers who can provide caregivers a needed break. In training, they offer 2 annual conferences for parents, as well as monthly training on a variety of topics chosen by parents. Parents can participate in specialized training to improve their ability to care for children with special behavioral needs if they need it. They have a really interesting pilot program that offers 15 families with professional residential treatment in their own home. In this pilot, professionals come to the house to address difficult behaviors while the parents are able to provide love and nurturing, and the child remains at home with the family. And that's a program I really want to know more about as they've operated it for a little while. And I'll just do a quick peek of the outcomes. What they've seen is that 96% of their foster families have been retained as foster parents for a minimum of 1 year, which we know is far better than the national average. And then in fiscal year 2013, their crisis intervention services prevented 32 adoption disruptions and stabilized a number of other families. The budget for this program is about $450,000, with about half of it from the State Department of Social Services and the rest from donations, grants, and fundraising events. Next program I want to talk about is a relatively new one. It's the Yakama Nation Kinship Program, which started in January 2014. It serves about 50 relative caregivers with 100 children in court-approved kinship care who are enrolled with the Yakama Nation in Washington State. And you'll see a similar array of services here. They include monthly support groups, and for those they have activities for children and youth so the whole family can be there. They have great navigation services with staff to help kinship caregivers find and access needed services and resources in the community, and to build their understanding of the child welfare system, which we know kinship caregivers don't enter voluntarily typically. The program manager can even attend court hearings and school meetings as a family advocate. They have special events where caregivers get to go to dinner, go to the theater, but they also get a break from caregiving. They also offer other respite through the local YMCA, where they have 3-hour respite events on Saturdays. Youth are able to participate in Yakama Nation camps for free and in the tribe's leadership development program. They have special educational support offered through the Indian Education Program of the tribe. And program staff are able to take caregivers who live on the reservation shopping to buy clothes, shoes, and other needed items for the children and youth in their care. And when I talked to Janice, the program manager, she just takes her van, drives a bunch of caregivers there, and follows them behind them with their credit card. It's a really supportive program. They also have a lending library. This program budget is about $150,000 with tribal funds, with a one-time grant from Casey Family Programs and a small fund from the state of Washington for some of the material supports. And they also get in-kind donations from the community. The third program I want to talk about is Placer County Permanency Support Services, which is a wraparound model of support that's a collaboration of Sierra Forever Families and Placer County Children's System of Care. And it's part of a broad recruitment, licensing, and support initiative called Placer Kids. This program serves about 35 children and youth adopted from foster care or placed in kinship care in Placer County, California. And they have a mostly in-home wraparound service model, and the services are provided by a team of a clinician, a permanency specialist, and an experienced adoptive parent. They offer some of the parent-child interaction therapy or dialectical behavior therapy, and the treatment plan typically involves working with the whole family. I'll just highlight on this one that one of the things we really like is that they have a special education service, school consultation. They help the parents write the child's IEP, consult with teachers, and provide even in-classroom support, which is really important. Their evaluations, they also have a 24-hour crisis. I don't want to forget mentioning that. Their evaluation showed that 91% of children and youth served showed improvement on the child and adolescent needs and strengths assessment, and that 95% of the children remained in the family home. The budget is about $200,000, and the primary funding source is Medi-Cal. I'm going to talk very briefly about the Seminole Tribes Family Preservation Program, which is another great tribal program that they do assessments of both younger children and older children to identify their needs and connect them with services. They have great partnerships between the Family Services Department, the Health Department, the Education Department to meet whatever need has been identified during the assessment. They also have wonderful case management. It's one of the lowest caseloads I've ever seen. They have caseloads of 4 or 5 families at a time. And the child has the same worker from investigation through the home study until case closure. So there's an incredibly strong relationship between the family and the worker. And this program is funded primarily with tribal funds with some support from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And those are my brief overviews, and I'm going to turn it over to Becky Main, who's going to speak about Tribal Family Support Services. Becky?
Thank you, Mary. Hi, everyone. Today I'd like to talk to you about, next slide please. Many tribes are able to provide support services to their children through resources available in their community. These supportive services can increase stability for a resource family and enhance their ability to meet their child's varied needs. Some examples: one tribe provided each of their children in ICWA out-of-home care with a care basket that had traditional foods and items, plus other things like a blanket or soaps, whatever there was a need for, they put into that care basket. This simple gesture could create a network of services for the child as well as build a relationship between the resource family, the tribe, and the state child welfare agency. Many tribes are developing and supporting resource homes so that they are informed, educated, and are able to meet a child's cultural needs. This is particularly important if Native children are placed with non-Native resource homes. One approach is providing culturally relevant teachings for resource families so that they can understand where the child has come from, who their family is, why it is important to learn and know about tribal history and oral teachings. One tribe used traditional healing ceremonies to help children with their grief and loss. This was also emphasized in developing resource families by helping them to understand why it is important for a child to grieve and what this could look like for a child and that child's family. Tribes want to ensure children are able to remain connected with their tribe and culture, so it is important that resource homes are able to recognize how they can support the children in their home by encouraging a child's cultural upbringing and keeping relationships intact between the child, their family, and also the resource family. Providing culturally relevant services for children on a consistent and regular basis is important. Some of these include language preservation, taking children on activities or field trips to do food harvesting, or participate in ceremonies are some examples. When children in out-of-home care and their resource families receive support services, they see affirmation of the tribal child welfare agency's willingness to open to their needs, feel like their concerns are important and will be addressed, and in turn they feel supported. By having these support services and good customer service, resource families are more readily able to share with others. These supportive services can look like unequal recruitment efforts between state and tribal child welfare agencies working together on behalf of a Native child for things such as placement resources or respecting tribal placement preferences, supporting the tribal child welfare agency certification and licensure, to develop resource families in joint collaborative efforts, to support efforts of child or state and tribal permanency planning so the resource family does not have to choose sides. Sometimes it is even sharing the same resource families and respecting each other's certification and licensure. If state and tribal child welfare agencies partner together in shared resources, both staff and financial, this can expand recruitment as well as development and support of resource families, such as respite, sharing of recruitment events, sharing time together in joint foster parent trainings, assisting the family if the other agency does not have a particular resource readily available. Tribal communities also find great value in the use of a support group to assist resource families because they are able to tap into each other's experience of what worked well, lessons learned, what other options that might have been available to them had they known, and how they were able to outreach to one another in between support group sessions. One example from one tribe, they gathered input from the attendees on what topics of training that they felt they needed in order to meet the needs of the children in their home, and what else they might need to support them. This support for current resource families also helps with recruitment efforts because, again, you have families who feel supported who could spread the word to prospective families. It can be important to tailor or adjust supports for Native children and their resource families, taking into account whether the resource family is Native or not, if this family is from the same tribe or even from a different tribe from the child. Strengthening different types of partnerships and exploring and engaging a variety of resources can help systems to be prepared to meet the unique needs of each child, their family, and resource family. For example, identifying and utilizing resources within the tribe will only enhance and benefit a child and resource family, as this will encourage the resource family to tap into resources that the child may be eligible to receive as a tribal member. But this also creates an opportunity for the resource family to become more familiar with tribal resources for the child. Some tribes partner with their state child welfare agencies and create opportunities to learn more about one another and what type of services are available to children and families. Tribes found that this created opportunities for their management and line staff, which helped develop relationships and engage our partner when there was a need to identify placement resources or to assist a child and resource family. With one tribe and county, for example, they allowed for joint funding between the two agencies to create a job that would serve the Native children in their community and help build services between two agencies. State child welfare agencies can also become informed of what resources are available to a Native American child. This is beneficial when looking to connect a child and their resource family, as well as encouraging culturally relevant services. Lastly, one tribe saw one of their resource families engage and build relationships in the community. As this relationship became more meaningful, they saw that the family was being invited to an array of tribal activities and events for things that involve the child, such as the feasts or name givings, memorials. But they also seen that the family was becoming more entrenched and part of that child's immediate and extended family. So now I want to turn it over to Deb and Connie to hear more about Alabama's approach to supporting families. Thank you.
Thanks, Becky. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the sharing of Alabama's model of pre- and post-adoption services. I'm Deb Finley, and I'm the Program Director of Alabama Pre- and Post-Adoption Connections. Co-presenting on Alabama services will be Connie Rogers, who's a Program Supervisor with our Public Child Welfare System. APAC stands for Alabama Pre- and Post-Adoption Connections. It's one of the many programs of Children's Aid Society, which is a nonprofit agency in Alabama that began serving families and children in Alabama over 100 years ago. APAC is a statewide program offering services from adoptive parent recruitment to training and to post-adoption support. APAC is a collaborative effort between Alabama's public child welfare system and Children's Aid Society. Connie Rogers is a program supervisor with the Alabama Department of Human Resources, and she's going to share some of the history of how APAC was formed.
Alabama DHR made a decision to use federal funds that were made available in 1997 by the Adoption and Safe Families Act to develop a post-adoption services program for Alabama adoptive families. We created an adoption advisory committee of 15, which included representatives from county and state Department of Human Resources offices, the Department of Mental Health and Mental Retardation, Department of Education, our court system, as well as foster and adoptive parents. The focus of the committee was to identify specific services that would respond to the needs of adoptive families after adoption finalization. The committee recommended the post-adoption services that ultimately were provided through the contract with Children's Aid Society, which became effective in 2001. Counseling services were then added in 2004. Pre-adoption services were added in 2007, when Alabama increased our efforts to find forever families for their children in foster care. Mentor services and crisis intervention were added in 2013. APAC's post-adoption services are paid through the adoption portion of the Safe and Stable Family Funds that our agency receives. APAC's pre-adoption services are paid through our adoption incentive funds. APAC currently serves all members of adoptive families in Alabama. We're very proud of the fact that Alabama recognizes that all adoptive families need and deserve post-adoption support, whether their adoption was through foster care, private or international, kinship guardianship, or even step-parent adoption. Some services are also available to our foster families, which can help stabilize placements and prepare for permanency. APAC also serves professionals that work with foster and adoptive populations. In fiscal year 2013-2014, APAC served over 4,600 individuals. 886 of these were adopted families, 925 were foster families, 775 were children, and approximately 1,500 were professionals. 570 were prospective adoptive families. APAC also works to educate communities about adoption issues, which also increases awareness of the need for adoptive resource. Training, exhibits, and educational literature are helpful in accomplishing community awareness. This slide shows a list of APAC's current services. Deb is now going to pick back up and review in more detail some of these services.
Okay, information and support. That's usually or often our point of access for families. We have toll-free helplines or website inquiries that can be responded to. Program staff answer adoption-related questions. They can provide information and make referrals if that's needed. People call for a lot of different reasons: how to adopt, how to tell a child that he or she was adopted, how to find a service in the community, how to learn more about special needs and issues related to adoption. Children's Aid Society website provides information and access to the APAC services. It also provides links to some of our partners, and that, of course, is Department of Human Resources, Alabama Foster and Adoptive Parent Association, Heart Gallery Alabama, AdoptUSKids, and others. We have quarterly newsletters that we distribute to all our APAC consumers, and these include articles of interest that, to foster parents, adoptive families, and to the professionals that work with these. APAC services and special events are publicized in the newsletters, and as long as we're reaching large amounts of people that are interested in adoption, we've also, many years ago, decided to include 2 full pages of waiting child pictures and bios to help with the recruitment. The newsletter is a large commitment of money, and printing and postage has increased throughout the years. But and, of course, we have more and more adoptive families that we work with. So this past year we decided to use email to send an electronic version of the newsletter to professionals. So this helps us stay within our budget. We still send the hard copy newsletters to our families, as experience tells us that having a newsletter sitting in the great room or by the phone or in the bedroom or even in the bathroom, parents tend to read or reread the articles. Adoptive family support groups. Licensed therapists co-lead adoptive parent support groups along with an adoptive parent. We have 20 groups throughout the state that provide adoptive parents an opportunity to support one another and receive emotional and informational support from trained therapists and other adoptive parents once a month. Each group chooses their own topics for discussion based on their unique interests and their needs. Some of the topics include family adjustments, behavioral concerns, attachment or other special needs issues, school issues, community relationships, many others. Children have separate support groups, and these are also guided by trained therapists. Child care is provided for each location, so the parents with the younger children that are not old enough for a support group, so the parents can attend their own groups. The groups start with a meal. This allows for informal networking for about 30 minutes. Then they separate into their individual groups, adult groups, and the child care groups for an hour. A closed adoptive parent Facebook group was added this past year to provide additional support for families that were not able to attend the face-to-face groups, or they just wanted this additional support. The Facebook group has over 170 adoptive parent members, and it's growing weekly. Logistics for setting this up and managing it was actually shared by Minnesota, who had a successful group going on there, and they told us about it at a national meeting several years ago. And so we started this service back in October of 2014. It's a great place for parents to connect and share information and resources with one another. Counseling. Adoptive families with adoption-related concerns can get free counseling services by our licensed therapists who are considered adoption experts. This counseling is available for any adoptive family or Alabama family with an adopted child in the home, or families with a foster child in the home that has an active plan for adoption with that family, or with a child adjusting after an adoption disruption. Occasionally, the state or our pre-adoption services staff will make a special request to meet with an adoptive resource to help them assess the family's readiness for adoption. And for the families that APAC prepares through training and home studies, we now routinely meet with them to review a child's background summary when the state matches them with a potential child placement. Counseling sessions can be in the office, in the home, or an agreed-upon location like in a school or a family meeting or in a DHR office. We have 4 counselors that cover the entire state, so we have 16 counties. Scheduling requires a lot of planning, flexibility, and frequent evaluation. The 4 counselors are located in our 4 largest cities in the state, so that helps. All of the counselors have over 5 years' experience working with adoptive families. Families can be referred for counseling once TPR has occurred and the child is placed with the adoptive family. It doesn't have to be finalized. And counseling can continue through finalization and beyond as long as is needed. This slide lists some of the issues that seem to bring our families to our counselors. The counseling service was not one of our original post-adoption services when we began in 2001. It was after several years, though, that we continued to have feedback from our adoptive families that they needed counseling to help stabilize and strengthen their families. This feedback was provided to our state contract liaison, and the service was added at the next contract cycle using adoption incentive funds available at that time. So we started with 1 counselor, then we added 3 part-time counseling positions, and over time we've grown to the current 4 counseling positions across the state. We started the counseling service with a brief therapy model, expecting to provide up to 20 counseling sessions over a period of maybe 4 to 6 months. But we've learned that families really need to float in and out of the counseling during their adoption journey. So a treatment plan is now developed with the family for a specified time, but that can be repeated at any time when the family encounters a new problem or a developmental stage, or just as long as is needed. In 2012, the state requested additional support to help families cope with adoption crises that might lead to disruption. So it was at that point in 2012 that we added a 24/7 toll-free line for crises, and the counselors, our 4 counselors, rotate weekly call for this. Families that are receiving our counseling service are provided the number to call if needed. Our experience has been that the families really prefer to call during the day when they can reach their own counselor who knows their family dynamics best, and of course we like that better too. Some families prefer to receive information and sharing individually with another adoptive parent rather than in a group, support group, or in a counseling setting with a professional. So interested adoptive parents are matched with experienced adoptive parents who provide mentoring by phone. This service was added in 2012. Initial marketing was targeting rural counties that didn't have easy access to the monthly support group. This service has not grown in those areas like we expected. One side note is that informal mentoring does occur from adoptive family group networking and the Facebook group, and that families meet and become friends and end up having contact and outside of the group meetings. Another way of facilitating informal adoptive family networking has been provided by special events for adoptive families around the state. It helps them become aware of APAC services when these are provided and outreached for them, but it also helps them to meet and become friends with other adoptive parents. Examples that we have for special events might be holiday parties, picnics, movie nights, ball game outings, skating or bowling parties. 3 to 4 hour brief respites are also provided and are examples of providing the networking with the children. Okay, the library, we're really proud of our library. It's an adoption lending library, but it has amazing resources for everybody. People can call to get them. They can come into the office. They can access online. and then we mail the resources free to the consumer in a mailer bag, and then they can return it to us free of charge also. These are some of the topics that we have, but we have many other topics in addition to these. Libraries are in 3 locations around our state, and we have over 4,000 resources. These include books, fact sheets, DVDs, CDs, and other resources related to adoption and special needs. Through the years, we've seen a shift in the types of resources requested. Of course, the many videotapes that we used to have had to be switched over to DVDs, and we see an increased request for DVDs instead of printed books. DVDs cost more, so our budget limits this growth, but we're slowly adding continuously to the DVD and books.
Okay, now we're curious to see if other agencies have resource lending libraries and who they serve. So we'll put up a poll question. Does your agency have a resource lending library? And you'll see the choices there, yes, and for what population do you provide the library? So if you'll answer that. Okay, we'll give you a few more seconds. Okay, looks great. A lot of programs are serving families through their resource libraries as well as professionals. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and our lending library is not just for adopted families, but really anyone who desires to use these resources for personal or professional growth. We find that foster parents who are required to have continued education to remain licensed each year, that they love this service, as we can provide documentation for them, and they can negotiate with their licensing agency for the amount of CEUs they receive. All resources checked out include a survey that's returned to us to let us know that if the resource was helpful. Based on the survey, the satisfaction for this service is very high, with at least 98% satisfaction. Okay, educational trainings. We provide trainings for both adoptive and foster parents and professionals. And the slide gives you a few of the trainings, the training titles, and we're requested by our stakeholders and researched, and we develop these, with our counselors who are adoption experts. We can provide these trainings either face-to-face to larger small groups, or in conferences, or in webinars. The webinars, I want to highlight that for a minute. We offer those now every month, and we offer it to hundreds of families and professionals. Budget reductions through the years resulted in fewer staff, or changing roles with those staff, so that meant that we had fewer staff available to conduct the face-to-face training. So in years past, we provided over 100 face-to-face trainings a year. Now we provide only about a third of that. But technology has allowed us to use the webinar at a much less expense and reduced staff time, and it allows us to reach more people. When we started this several years ago, we might have had 25 to 50 participants, and we're pleased with that. But now, because of the marketing and the capacity that we've reached with our webinar service, we provide these every month, and over 300 people participate in those each month. We do record those now, and they're available through our APAC resource library in our archive for webinars. Children's Aid Society is a CEU provider for the Alabama Board of Social Work Examiners, as well as the National Board of Certified Counselors. So CEUs for all of our live webinars and trainings are available for social workers and counselors. We also provide certificates of attendance for foster parents. APAC services, training services also include what we call a trained therapist network service, and that's intended to educate professionals that work with the foster and adoption population. We bring in nationally known experts twice a year for all-day workshops on adoption-related topics. An average of 500 participants attend per each expert, and we give 5.5 CEUs for attendance at those trainings. APAC training also includes a 3-day permanency conference once a year for direct service workers with our state child welfare system. And there's over 200 professionals that are trained in that 3-day conference each year. And finally, we get to Camp APAC. We love this. It's one of our most popular services. Each year, 140 adopted children between the ages of 9 and 18, that includes their birth or foster siblings in this age group, are able to attend this 4-day summer camp. Camp is free for the families that have adopted at least one child from foster care, and bus transportation is provided across the state. Camp was one of the original services provided in the first few years of APAC, but we had a 50 camper capacity at that time. And due to its popularity by the children and the parents, it was expanded to serve 100 youth. It eventually grew to serve 140 campers. Each year we have over 300 applicants for the camper slot, so there's a lot of disappointed families that don't get in each year. It used to be first come, first serve, but we found that some parents figured out how to fax or email their applications the very second that registration opened. So now we give priority to those that haven't been to camp before. And many parents tell us that Camp APAC changed their children's lives and that the children finally felt like they weren't so different and that there were many friends to be made that were adopted and they could be lifelong support. Of course, the children tell us they want camp to last all summer. Staff, not so much all summer. Recruitment. The next few slides focus on the pre-adoption part of APAC, and Connie is going to speak on that. Recruitment is her expertise and is one of her passions.
In 2007, pre-adoption services were added to the APAC program. From the very beginning in 2001, we understood that having a relationship with an adopted family early in their adoption journey was invaluable to help us strengthen and empower them in a proactive way rather than waiting to know them and help them when a crisis erupted. We understood this in a greater way once we initiated the counseling services in 2005. Based on this understanding, as well as the need that we had for an increased pool of adopted families, for a growing pool of waiting children, we decided to add some pre-adoption services to the APAC contract so support services could be provided from the very beginning of the adoption journey and throughout. APAC's pre-adoption services actually had its beginnings with a recruitment response team that was initially funded with RRT funds from AdoptUSKids. When that funding stream ended for states, the RRT was picked up jointly by the state and Children's Aid Society, and then ultimately became a part of the RFP that we issued for pre- and post-adoption services. The RRT responds to inquiries of people exploring foster care or adoption. Some families are just beginning their journey, and others only want information. Those wanting to foster or adopt young children are referred back to our county DHR offices, but those families wanting to adopt the special needs waiting child are picked up by our APAC program. Last year, the RRT responded to 1,825 families making inquiries about fostering or adopting. The other pre-adoption services of APAC began in 2007. APAC now recruits, provides GPS, which is a form of MAPS training, and prepares home studies for families interested in adopting the special needs waiting child. These children are considered harder to place. Home studies are submitted to the State Department of Human Resources for approval and matching, but APAC remains available to the families for support through this process. Regular contacts are made with the families who indicate on surveys that the most difficult time for them is the time of waiting between approving and matching. Sometimes matching takes a few months, but it can take up to 2 years before an appropriate match is made. And then there are some that never have had a child that matches the family's capacity. At the end of last fiscal year, APAC had recruited and trained and had 278 adoption home studies approved. 206 children have been matched with these families to date. The post-adoption services staff are also now included in the support for these waiting families, with the family support workers making contact when a match occurs and the counselors offering support to discuss the child's background summary. Counseling is also offered and encouraged when pre-placement visits occur, placements take place, petition is being filed, and finalization occurs. In 2012, a child-specific caseload recruiter was added to the pre-adoption services. This recruiter has been given a caseload of approximately 15 children who were identified as harder to place and in need of special supports and recruitment efforts in order to locate and prepare adoptive families for the children in the caseload. This was actually modeled after the Wendy's Wonderful Kids programs that we already have. Okay, who provides the APAC services? The state of Alabama contracts with Children's Aid Society to provide the services. As APAC's program director, Deb's going to speak to this.
Okay, Connie. APAC is now under 2 separate contracts, so I've listed the staff by contract, post-adoption program employees, 11 licensed MSWs and counselors. All of these have at least a 3-year experience with adoption. A few of us have a few more than that. And some of us have had more experience and some of you have been alive. Okay, we'll move on. Pre-adoption services has 3 MSWs, 1 BSW, and 2 support staff for the response and retention, and then the one-time part-time recruiter. Our staff includes adult adoptees, adoptive parents, foster parents, and siblings in adoptive families. Outcomes and evaluations. This slide gives an example of some of our numbers outcome. I'll just kind of let you look at that for a sec. The Children's Aid Society software database captures the demographics and the service documentation. Numbers of services provided, number of clients served, and number of families served are collected, along with the survey results for the quality of our services. Just a note, we don't count the professionals in our family count, but we do count them in our client count. Each one of the APAC services that we've talked about today is evaluated separately to determine if the client received what they needed or it increased their knowledge of how to handle a particular adoption issue. A survey is provided for client feedback after individual services are provided, and these are summarized per service. The next slide gives you the outcomes one particular year. Any given year it's different, but for the adoptive family groups. Each adoptive family support group is surveyed twice a year to have feedback from those participants. A statewide recap revealed that 93% of adoptive family members who attended these groups responded to the survey, reporting that they received emotional support and improved their family's functioning as a result of attending the group. Changes are made based on individual group feedback. Other ways we assess the groups include feedback from the actual therapists that work with the families in those groups and the adoptive parent co-leaders. APAC staff also monitors the groups at least quarterly. And another way to assess is just the numbers. I mean, if a group has large numbers attending every month, then something must be going well. If it has low numbers, then something different probably needs to happen. One group recently experienced some low numbers, and we're continuously evaluating that piece of assessing that. And so the staff decided with the participants to take a different approach, and they decided to use a book club series. So they agreed on a book, an adoption-related book, and they read a chapter or so each month, and then in their meeting discussed the book. And it proved very successful for the participants, and we're going to consider this in other areas of the state. Challenges. Outreach is an ongoing challenge. If adoptive families don't know about these valuable free services, then they can't benefit from them. There's also always new adoptive families, so we have to get the word out. Also, there's sometimes difficulty in helping families understand that APAC is not the public welfare agency and that their information is confidential to APAC unless they consent for an exchange of information, and that consent is necessary for us to do the home studies. Sometimes there's a lack of understanding for the pre-adoption families on what APAC can and cannot do, such as matching for a child for their family. APAC can help DHR be aware of the waiting families, but we don't have any control over authority over the matching or the placement. We do have input, and that is solicited by the state. Cutbacks, that's always a challenge in this era. APAC budget has changed through the years, and that's impacted our staffing patterns and our roles. We once had 5 regional coordinators at 5 different regional offices. Now APAC has 2 regional coordinators out of 2 regional offices, and we do maintain 2 satellite offices in addition. The pre-adoption services is now a separate contract, and juggling the budget line items to remain in budget to provide the best services are sometimes difficult. The pre-adoption contract is also an outcome-based reimbursement for those of you that do program structuring, so that creates occasional stress just to make sure that we have enough money to cover our expenses. Contract cycles are another challenge. Children's Aid and DHR designed the program together, and they're partners for its implementation. But every 3 to 5 years, DHR revises the contract and or the budget based on consumer, staff, and stakeholder feedback and the state's resources. So RFPs are solicited and agencies submit the bids. Children's Aid has always had the contract for these support services for adoptive families, but there's never any guarantee that that would always remain the same. So that presents some difficulty for staff when we approach those bidding years, and it's also a potential issue for adoptive families if there's ever a transition time for another service provider. Geography also creates a challenge. Of course, rural counties have fewer adoptive families, and so we tend not to have enough to have a support group in those areas. Technology's helped us to reach out to many of those due to internet, email, webinars, library software for checkout in the library and not having to come in. It's difficult for families also to access our counseling in our 4 counseling office locations, but in-home counseling is provided, and that can be a challenge to us. Driving 2 or more hours from the regional office to that family in a more remote area of the state is a challenge. We also we use that for we use common locations to help counselors meet that challenge sometimes. And phone and email communication also assist in supporting the families in between sessions. So in closing, I want to thank you for in closing on the APAC part of this, I want to thank you for your interest in Alabama's adoption support services. I'd encourage you to visit our Children's Aid Society website and learn more about the APAC program. You can email us through the website if you want additional information. I'll be glad to talk with you if any of you are interested in more detailed information or interested in developing a similar model and just have some questions. So please connect with us. Thank you, and I'll turn this back over to Mary Boo, who will talk about implementing family support services.
Thank you, Deb, and thank you, Connie. I love listening to you talk about Alabama's wonderful program example. It's one that I talk about a lot, and it's great to hear it from you all directly. And I want to thank Becky for the insights she shared about supporting families in tribal communities. I'm going to talk briefly about the topic of implementation, and much of the information in the guide about effective implementation was gathered from public and private nonprofit leaders of support programs whom we brought together for a convening in January 2014, and Deb and Connie were both there. They kindly left warm Alabama for chilly St. Louis for that meeting. And implementation planning is critical for moving from a good idea to an effective program that actually can serve people and be sustained. And planning for implementation is one of the things that the NRCDR can help with if you're interested in adding support services to your program. As we looked at a variety of these programs, a key theme that emerged was that almost every program involved a partnership. Almost no one entity is doing this work alone. A few were public-public partners, like the Seminole tribe within the tribe, and then some of the tribal and state partnerships that Becky mentioned. Most were public-private partnerships like Alabama's, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. And the primary benefit of partnerships is that no one has to do all of the work by themselves. Contributions and effort are shared, and a team can generate new ideas and reach new populations. Specific benefits of public-private partnerships include that governments often have the primary resources and primary responsibility to achieve the goal of successful adoptive, foster, and kinship care placements. But nonprofits may have more flexibility, more access to families. There's no stigma about going to a private agency, and some families may still feel reluctant to go back to a public agency for support. And nonprofits can raise other funds that can supplement what the government might invest. We know that these partnerships can reach and serve more diverse populations with different types of partnerships, whether they're regional or targeting different racial or ethnic groups. And we've seen that partnerships increase the likelihood of sustainability. We have one more poll question here, which is what type of partnership operates your foster, adoptive, or kinship care support program? And we'll try to do this one really quickly because we're getting near the end here. So we'll just give this about 10 seconds, then we'll go. All right, let's take a look at the results. Okay, so again, so what we saw other places, that the public and the nonprofit agency partnership is definitely the norm, and there's a reason for that. I want to talk a little bit about what the leaders we brought together said helps form a successful partnership. And the first, here are some steps that they identified to building partnerships, and I'll talk a bit about some of them. First is to start with the goals. And first and foremost, before doing anything, know what you want to accomplish, both outcomes for families and children and the goals of the partnership itself. Next, they had to determine what the structure might look like. Was it an equal partnership with both investing? Was it a funder-grantee partnership, multiple funders and one organization, or one funder and multiple partners? So those are things to identify first off. Next is to identify the partners. And if we're talking here to public agencies, the partners might include parent support groups or foster adoptive parent associations, placing agencies such as the Children's Aid Society in Alabama, multi-service agencies, and universities are a great partnership we saw crop up a number of times that can bring some interesting contributions, especially in the evaluation and data analysis field. And then next step is to establish trust, vision, and values, and really investing time to build relationships between or among partners. The people we heard from said to start these conversations early, but also to keep having them over time to ensure everybody stays on the same place and keeps building that trust. Another thing they emphasized was the need to clarify roles and expectations and to be as explicit as possible from the beginning. One thing we heard about, especially with funder-fundee relationship, is to address the power dynamics. Talk about who's in charge and where decisions get made up front and early so it doesn't run into problems later on. The other advice that we heard from the leaders we brought together was to remember to nurture the partnership. And I think Deb and Connie are a great example of that. They work together in many, many areas. A couple people talked about if you start a partnership and then don't pay attention to it, it can really suffer. So you've got to start strong and stay strong over time. The first step in working on implementation is creating an implementation team to take the lead. And you need team members who are passionate about helping in children, youth, and families, and committed to the belief that families who need it deserve ongoing support. The team needs to be diverse in terms of level within the agency. You want to mix frontline staff with managers, with supervisors, with administrators. And mixing people from different areas is great, including people working in recruitment. Consider how you can work with agencies and individuals who are responsible for recruitment and family preparation. And by partnering with these departments, you can help support more integration of recruitment and support, which helps improve both recruitment efforts and support services. Another key consideration that we talk about a bit in the guide, and I won't talk too much about here, are addressing implementation drivers. And there's been much research on successful implementation, and they've identified 3 areas that need close attention: competency, organization, and leadership. And competency really means, one of the key areas there is selection, training, and support of staff. And I know that I think Deb mentioned that their staff included foster adoptive parents, and that's one of the things that you got to consider. Is that a skill? Is that a competency you want in your staff, so that you know up front what you're looking for? You might also want to know if your staff, great interpersonal skills are important, being culturally responsive, being trauma-informed, and again, that's where training can build that trauma-informed care within your agency. In terms of an organization driver, data is a critical one, both to know what you want to provide, so some of the needs assessment we talked about earlier, but also how you'll evaluate what you're accomplishing and are you meeting your goals. And successful implementation relies on harnessing and conveying the power of this data. And I'll just say one thing about leadership. One of the things we heard over and over again is you have to find leaders and champions at all levels. You can't just have one person who's in charge of implementing the program or leading the program, or the program can really suffer if turnover happens or if they get another assignment. One of the themes we saw during conversations with leaders of effective support programs is the need to reach families, and that this takes special effort even when the services offered are excellent. The guide includes a tool to assess your organization's or agency's ability to reach and engage families in a number of areas. And we have a couple of the questions here. I'm not going to read them, but I'll highlight a few. One is, do staff and volunteers value the role of parents and youth? Have staff and volunteers received training in key issues involved in adoption, foster care, and kinship care? We also offer questions related to outreach, meaning are there varied outreach strategies? Does the agency have a strategy to reach families early? And again, emphasizing here before placement, but definitely before crisis. And we also had questions in the service delivery area. Again, they're in the guide, so I won't read them. Just give you a quick look here at what the tool looks like in the guide. And some of the questions are, again, this is some of the outreach ones. And one of the things you can notice here is that if you notice your agency needs improvement, you might create a work stream to figure out how to do better in that area. So that was my very quick overview of implementation. We're going to do one more poll. It's about evaluation, which I'm going to talk a little bit about before turning it over to Jill. Can you talk about what types of evaluation you're currently doing for your support services? Okay, let's give it about 5 more seconds. Let's see what we've got. And we'll see here that most people are doing no formal evaluation, and that is no surprise. We still have a long way to go for that in the child welfare field, and one of the things we highlight is what some people are doing that we recommend. But you can see after no formal evaluation, parent and youth surveys are pretty high on the list, as well as before and after assessments. I'll talk a little bit about that. One of the first things we see as sort of a basic evaluation tool is just tracking services. What service you're providing, to whom, how many, and when. And sort of much more in depth, of course, is evaluating outcomes. And assessing how children and families are faring as a result of the services is much more important, or as important. We saw programs do this a variety of ways. One is assessment tools. The most common were Child and Adolescent Needs and Strengths tool, Parenting Stress Index, Post-Trauma Stress Index, and Child Behavior Checklist. And in most cases, just as that survey showed, they were administered before and after services to come, so they could really track the impact. Next thing people did is they collected case data, and some of it I cited earlier. Are adoptions staying together? Are foster placements still together? Are the foster parents still with the agency? Are children doing better in school? That's often from case files. And then as you all saw in the survey, surveys of parents and youth are very common. This can be pre and post tests, as well as surveys after the service is provided. Some of the programs we looked at did annual or quarterly surveys, and others did follow-up, maybe a year or more after services, to see if the differences were maintained over time. Focus groups we talked about earlier are a great way, particularly to assess program operation and strategy. And this is where you can look at what's working and for whom and where you're missing out. And I think Deb talked about that with their parent support group. So if a support group isn't attracting attendees, a survey might figure out why people aren't coming and what they can do differently. And as I mentioned earlier, the data that you get here can really help you make needed changes in the program and make a difference for future services offered. And then one of the things other thing I want to say is that you'll notice we say here sharing results with the people served. Collecting data is just one step. It's really good to be able to show the parents, the youth, the professionals you survey or you have in a focus group, to show them the results, see how what they said fit with others, and really help them see this as part of a continuous quality improvement effort and help them feel invested in the services and help you take what you're doing to the higher levels of effectiveness. All right, that is my quick discussion of evaluation. Again, you'll find much more in the guide, and I'm going to turn it over to Jill Marshall-May, who will talk more about how the National Resource Center for Diligent Recruitment at AdoptUSKids can help you.
Thanks, Mary. We're almost nearing the end here, but I do want to say quickly that the National Resource Center for Diligent Recruitment at AdoptUSKids is able to provide capacity building services, coaching, resources, and other support to jurisdictions to assist you with your work to implement family support services. As you heard several times during this webinar, we know that there's a close and important connection between effective family support and effective recruitment efforts, and we're very interested and invested in helping states, tribes, and counties' child welfare systems to build their comprehensive diligent recruitment programs. So for more information you'll see here on the slide, you can visit us at our website at nrcdr.org, or you can email us or call us at the number provided here. So I think that I can speak on behalf of both Kathy and I. We know that you've heard a lot of information on today's webinar, and we hope that you found it helpful. We just want to quickly highlight a couple more specific resources and publications from the AdoptUSKids project that we think you'll find particularly useful. Throughout the webinar, we've referenced this guide, which is available on the NRCDR website and the AdoptUSKids website at the link provided, and also on our webinar event webpage. Our NRC has developed a customer service framework. Many of you may have attended our previous webinar, to help enhance family recruitment and support. And we think that you'd find these resources additionally as helpful to consider how to create or strengthen your family support services. And as Mary just mentioned, we know that data is a crucial tool for planning and implementing your recruitment, development, and support of families. So we're highlighting some of our resources on data. As Mary discussed, we think it's particularly important for you to use the data and evaluation information you collect about support needs and services to inform your recruitment planning and messaging so that you have an ongoing feedback loop between your recruitment efforts and your support efforts. On the next slide, we have just a couple of additional resources that may be helpful to you. We hope that you'll join us for our next webinar, which will be on diligent recruitment implementation, which will be on September 24th. So if you go to our website, you can get more details about that. So now I'm going to open it up for a couple of questions. We've got just a few more minutes, but we do. I want to ask Connie and Deb. You've got a couple of questions here. One of the participants asked, do you have a database that you refer families out to for counseling, or do you have a therapist on site?
We have therapists on staff. There are 4 therapists around the state.
One of the purposes of the Trained Therapist Network that was started several years ago was for us to build a resource directory of therapists throughout the state who are coming to hear the adoption experts speak, and we do have that information that we can refer families to. The counselors on staff with APAC also have relationships with local counselors who may be topic experts that they can refer folks out to.
Great, thank you guys. I have another question for you. Can you speak more about the training and ongoing support of your mentors?
The mentor service in itself has not really grown like we expected, but the protocol is in place. and we do the initial orientation with them. But because it has not grown, we really don't have a group ongoing training, but we do have the regular trainings like the monthly webinars that they access, and we provide that information to them to grow. But it's not specifically about situations that they might encounter in that mentor relationship.
As far as the state agency, we also tried to do a foster parent mentoring program as a part of our PIP from the last CFSR, and we actually patterned much of our work after the program in Kentucky. So if somebody's looking for a resource for mentor training, Kentucky might be a good state to contact. I hope they're on the line and they're hearing me brag about them.
Great, thanks. I'm going to give you guys just a quick second here to breathe and ask a question of Mary. Mary, do you have any examples of partnerships with faith-based organizations, or are there any highlighted in the guide?
That is a good question that that we definitely highlight. It depends on what you call a faith-based organization. We definitely highlight a program from Bethany Christian Services. They have a program called Adopt, which is based on it's a therapeutic model, therapeutic group for adoptive parents, and they're running that through their agencies around the country. And then we also have a program that's with Catholic Charities, I believe, is one of the contractors. But otherwise, I can't think of. We certainly are very familiar with churches being part of support groups, know about that in a number of places. I know about it personally here in Minnesota. It's one of the more common ones. There are certain churches who have that as their ministry and then build support services around it. And I know that Ruth McCroy often talks about the Possum Trot, the big recruitment effort out of a church in Texas, in a small town in Texas, and they've also built sort of support services into it because so many of the church families adopted. So those are the ones that I can think of off the top of my head.
Great. Thanks, Mary. I think we've got time for just a couple more questions. So I'm going to ask one of Deb and Connie again. So how do you make the case to invest in services, and how have you kept funding over time?
I think because Children's Aid Society does such a marvelous job monitoring outcomes and assessing the services, and we can show positive outcomes, that it helps us defeat any chatter that happens about cutting services. There have been budget cuts over time, but the agency as a whole has had that. We are lucky in our state to have a commissioner who is very adoption focused, and so I don't know that we've had a problem convincing people it was a smart thing to do.
I also think that the partnership that the Children's Aid Society staff and the APAC staff in particular have maintained with the state, that we are all on board and all involved in the planning and agree on what's needed, and so I think just knowing the examples.
And the partnership goes beyond our two agencies. Heart Gallery, our Foster Adoptive Parent Association, is at the table, and one of the things that we were texting back and forth about, the information we get through the families that participate in APAC's programs as far as meaningful stakeholder input for our CFSP and APSR, it's just invaluable.
Great. Well, thank you both so much, and thank you, everybody, for your time today. Time is just about up. I do want to let you know that this webinar will be archived, both the audio and the PowerPoint, on our website. And please, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us again through our website or our email address. So thanks so much. Have a great afternoon.